Richard, I want to play some sound from Newt Gingrich over the weekend. Right now, Mitt Romney at the halfway mark in terms of delegates. What will Newt do? I think it's more what he didn't say here than what he says. Let's listen.
Hit him as hard as I could. He hit me as hard as he could. Turned out he had more things to hit with than I did. And that's part of the business. And he's done the fundraising side brilliantly. We are both, and I think Santorum would agree with this, we are absolutely committed to defeating Barack Obama. If Mitt Romney ends up as the Republican nominee, I will work as hard for him as I would for myself.
But he doesn't say, Richard, that he's not going to be running anymore. So he's still in the race. What's the impact of that on Mitt Romney and on Rick Santorum, for that matter?
Well, I think it does two things. For Mitt Romney, what it does is it sort of makes him the presumptive, GOP nominee. For Rick Santorum, I think it clears the way for him to say that, Newt Gingrich is a non-factor, and therefore conservative. Like if you're a true, real, red-blooded conservative, that you should vote for me, and not Newt Gingrich, because Newt Gingrich is basically throwing his hat in. I think what Newt Gingrich did, he came everything just as close to saying that I'm not in the race without saying I'm not in the race, unfortunately.
What do you think, David? Do you think he's in for the long haul?
No, I think this is over. I think Mitt Romney is the presumptive nominee. You're going into Pennsylvania, which is Senator Santorum's home state. He only has $1.2 million in the bank. Governor Romney's already spent $2.7 million on ads in Pennsylvania. Polls show it's relatively close. I think Romney wins there. And at that point, Santorum has to hang up the cleats. I think this moved into the general election mode a couple weeks ago when you had people like President Bush, Jeb Bush, Marco Rubio, Paul Ryan all endorse Governor Romney in the same week. And I think they're really starting to think about the general election right now.
So it sounds like the way you describe it, David, that things are on track for Mitt Romney.
I think things are very much on track for Mitt Romney, and he's thinking about what it's going to take to beat President Obama on November 6th.
Do you think either of these other candidates could play a role in a ticket for Mitt Romney?
It's something you can't rule out. I'm sure that they're going to be kind of on the short list. Rick Santorum is definitely a movement candidate. He has supporters that are as ardent supporting him as any candidate we've seen in recent memory. And I think that Governor Romney needs to work very closely with him in order to get their energy on board of his campaign. Other candidates probably are higher on the short list for VP, but I think that they're going to be valuable assets as surrogates in the general election campaign.
Who do you like?
As VP, I think the first name that's been coming to a lot of people's minds is Marco Rubio. He's young, dynamic, fulfills a demographic and a geographic assist. And I think that there are other candidates that are definitely going to be looked at. Paul Ryan has to be considered. You have Governor Susana Martinez in New Mexico as the first female Hispanic governor in the U.S. And then there's a vast array of governors from Chris Christie to Haley Barbour all across the country that would be great number twos for Governor Romney.
Richard, what's more important in picking a VP candidate, the geographic or the demographic, as David brings up?
I think it's a little bit of both. I think you need the geographic information, like, where they're located and how that helps, but also, sometimes you need the demographic information. I think for President Obama, when he was running in 2008, he was sort of seen as being unexperienced, so he found experience in a VP candidate, where in other cases, you pick folks that will help you do certain things. Under President Clinton, he picked Al Gore because Al Gore would help him solidify some of the Southern vote. So I think it just depends upon what the race calls for, and based upon what the race calls for, that's who you pick as your nominee. I think at the same time, I think that there's a good possibility that Romney could fall into the pitfalls of just picking a demographic and not picking the right candidate, very similar to John McCain.
Could it be a woman, Richard? Could you see that happening?
I think it could definitely be a woman. I think it could definitely be a Latino, a male or female, or it could be an African American for them. And I think the field is all open. But I think the critical understanding, the critical thing that Mitt Romney needs to do is find out what's going to be the best and what's going to suit him the best. And I'm of the understanding that I don't think Marco Rubio would be the best fit for Mitt Romney, simply because Marco Rubio is, one, very new to the political scene. To the national political scene. Two, there's a good possibility that even if Marco Rubio is a nominee, that Mitt Romney doesn't carry Florida, which is a horrible thing for Mitt and a horrible thing for him in the general election.
Florida has been such a key. Let's put up the delegate map if we can. Just take a look of the delegates so far, where we are, how many are at stake. Florida's really played a key role.
Florida's played a very important role, and it's definitely a state that Governor Romney would have to win. I'm not sure I agree with Richard. I think if Senator Rubio is on the ticket, someone who won a three-way race as a strong conservative in Florida, he's obviously extremely popular. I think approval ratings of greater than 60% right now. I think he's a very formidable number 2 on the ticket.
He
might help
says
with Florida.
absolutely not. He said it again and again and again. He is not going to be a vice presidential candidate.
He has said it over and over again. And one thing I do agree
So
with
is Chris
Richard.
Christie, right?
Yeah, he said. Then I think that other people have said that in the past and ended up on the ticket.
Why do they say that? Why say no? And then, I mean,
Well, I think there's a
wonder.
class called Becoming a VP 101, and that's the first lesson
Is it?
you learn.
Oh,
yeah,
okay.
exactly.
Good to know.
Yeah, you got to deny. That is really the trick to it. That's most vice presidential nominees have denied it until they were picked. They're like, I didn't even know they were going to ask me.
Isn't it better to just say, you know what, I haven't been asked. I know I'm qualified for the job, and I would love to serve my country in any way, but right now I have no plans.
I mean, I'm not really sure the reason why they do it. I think it has something to do with, the whole, political ego thing that, you are number 2 to, I guess, the most egotistical person in the room, which happens to be the nominee for president of the United States. So your job is to sort of downplay your role and, amplify the nominee for the particular party.